Welcome to the Private Lender Podcast with your hosts from Hard Money Bankers, Jason Balin and Chris Haddon. This podcast is sponsored by HardMoneyMastermind.com.
Hey everyone, it's Jason Balin from Hard Money Bankers. Got a good group of guests that I'm going to introduce to everybody here in a second. Our guests are from Lender Consulting Services. It's a firm, a consulting firm that we've been using here for the last few years to help us order some appraisals and environmental studies and some construction services and things like that. So, full transparency, want to just make sure, everything we're utilizing in our business, you have access to as well. And we've been very happy with a lot of their services. So figured I would bring them on, let them introduce themselves. And we have Liz here first. So why don't we, Liz, real quick, why don't you just give us a quick background about, who Lender Consulting Services is?
Hi, Jason. Thanks for having us. We're really excited to be here. Lender Consulting Services, also well known as LCS. We were established 25 years ago. We're celebrating our anniversary this year. We're headquartered out in Buffalo, New York, but we're a nationwide provider of environmental appraisal and construction due diligence. We provide those solutions to lenders nationally to manage their risk management solutions.
Awesome. Yeah, so we're going to bring in a few other colleagues of yours to talk about the individual services and the products that are offered. And again, because a lot of the viewers and listeners are private lenders or hard money lenders that typically deploy their own money or money that they have control, we're going to gear it towards that. I know you guys have a lot of additional services and products that you guys offer related to commercial appraisal review and residential appraisal review and a lot of more detailed services as needed. But just for, time restraints, we're going to kind of just utilize some reports that our company, Hard Money Bankers, has used in the past, because I think they're probably the most relevant. So let's bring in Noelle first. Hey, Noelle. So what's actually your title at Lender Consulting Services?
Hi, Jason. I am the VP of Valuation Services at LCS, handling appraisal reviews and also evaluation reports, which is basically kind of a scaled down appraisal report. Appraisal light is what we kind of like to call it, for your lower risk transactions under a certain threshold. There were regulations federally that said, if you meet these parameters, you don't necessarily need to order a full appraisal. You can order an eval that would be prepared by a real estate professional with the experience to give you a market value as of today. So that's kind of us in a nutshell, and I can go deeper.
Sure. And I mean, that makes a lot of sense, because one of the things that a lot of hard money and private lenders do is they're doing like small balance commercial projects. And then, in a lot of those projects, the borrowers or clients just don't have a budget to get a full on blown out appraisal. They don't have the timelines. Sure. They don't have the budget. And from my experience, the data that we can get at a fraction of the cost from a lot of these services is so much better. So let's just break this conversation into two different things, maybe a residential evaluation and a commercial evaluation. So sure. What we've been ordering is a residential evaluation with an interior and exterior inspection. What typically kind of goes into that? What's the approximate cost, approximate timelines, things like that?
Sure. So it's basically a scaled down appraisal, like I said, and when the order comes in, for us to do an interior and exterior inspection, we have partnerships with professional inspector companies nationwide, so that definitely increases our footprint to get out and see those properties quickly, get the photos. We work with the borrower to get inside of the asset, do a really good assessment of the condition of the building, for which we put those those photos and that kind of boots on the ground knowledge of that in the report. We'll use, current MLS data, for a residential report. We use MLS data. It'll include at least 3 sales. We'll do adjustments just like you see in an appraisal and come up with a value as of today. So that's pretty much our residential product, eval product, I should say. And the turnaround time for those with an inspection, it takes a little bit longer. Interior inspections take a little longer. So those are about 15-day turn times. And then without the interior, you can also do that. It's kind of an a la carte service. If you are kind of familiar with the interior of the building and you just want the exterior, that would be about 10 days and a little bit, less costly as well. So it just depends on what you think, what works best. We definitely, can look at the property and say, this is newer construction, or, maybe this is an older building. We really want to get in there and look at the mechanicals of the building and make sure everything is up to snuff, so that, there's some flexibility there. But this is definitely a cheaper, faster way of getting a value. Like I said, normally, with an interior inspection, it'll be about 15 days. And then the price point for a residential eval is inspection. Yep.
Yeah, $400 or $500, $300 or $500, depends on probably where it's located, if it's turnaround times, things like that. And then on the commercial side, and I'm guessing, pricing is going to differ for everybody, so don't be too concerned about that, because you might not know the answers on some of that stuff. But like, how does the commercial valuations work? Let's say, like, we've been doing commercial valuations, interior and exterior, sales approach, and income approach.
Okay.
I'm guessing a very similar process.
Very similar process. As far as the inspection is concerned, we work with our third party to get them out there to get boots on the ground, look at the asset. And again, we use sales from CoStar or, local municipalities. We verify the data of the sales just like you would do in the appraisal process. And then we also do an income approach based on either the lease in place, or we can kind of go to the market and say, if there isn't a lease in place or we don't have the information. So, this is another thing that kind of drives how we do the process, whether or not sometimes you can't get 3 years of operating history from the borrower, or that's just not available. Maybe they're not savvy enough to have that information on hand. We can just go to the market and say, this typical building would rent for this much. It would cost this much in expenses to run this type of building, real estate taxes and insurance. And then we derive a value, pick a cap rate, all of that you would see in an appraisal.
Yeah, I agree. And we like doing the income approach as much as the sales approach. And most times those numbers kind of end up being very similar to begin with.
Absolutely. As they should be. It's kind of a check of reasonableness to have those two approaches of value, to say, they should be around the same ballpark.
And last kind of question on the appraisals. I know there's like a review as well. Like, is that like your guys' team internally reviewing this third parties? Is that what that is? Okay.
Absolutely. So we do appraisal reviews, different levels there. If you just want a quick checklist to make sure everything's compliant, the appraiser did all the math right and kind of followed typical appraisal methodology. And then we have a kind of a medium level review called the administrative review. That review has a little bit more narrative. We even go back to the appraiser and say, hey, did you think about this? This needs to be fixed in the report. It's not actionable as is. We work directly with the appraisers to get it actionable. And then our highest level of review takes all of that and then adds a little bit more narrative to the reporting, gives you a really good, accurate account of the credibility of the actual appraisal review. in that, we also offer a validation report, which is if you have a prior appraisal on an asset, let's say it's 1 or 2 years ago, we can review that prior appraisal. And if there hasn't been, then we look to the market, we look to the asset, we actually go out and do a physical inspection. And then we say, okay, there hasn't been a lot of change in the market or a lot of change in the asset. Maybe there hasn't been, it's a stable asset. They haven't done any major renovations in the last 2 years. We can say if there's no significant decline in value, that prior appraised value is valid as of today. So basically you're using that prior report as your benchmark for your lending. So that's another way that you don't necessarily have to get a brand new appraisal. You can do a validation on a fairly recent report where we can kind of prove that there hasn't been a significant decline since the prior analysis.
Perfect. Yeah, no, that all makes sense. Noelle, super helpful on this topic. I'm going to bring in Julie in the environmental services side of things, and honestly, like, I think for a lot of private lenders, smaller hard money lenders, things like that, I think the environmental stuff is the newest for them. I think that's just a department that they're not that, just, I don't know, you just don't know a lot about that. So I guess I'm curious, like, where do you recommend somebody starting? Let's say they're buying, well, 2 questions. Do you ever do environmental stuff on residential properties, or is this mostly commercial stuff?
So we do environmental due diligence on any property type, just depending on risk tolerance. So there are certain risks that come with unoccupied land, vacant land, undeveloped land, however you want to call it, also single family. There can be risks associated. We would recommend starting with a loan check to screen that out. There's certain questions we ask and historical research as well as regulatory information that we compile that if there was a major concern, we would hope that it would be fleshed out by asking all the right questions, looking at limited resources to try to determine if there's something that should be looked at closer.
Got it. So unless it's, a high risk site like, laundromat or gas station or things like that, most of the time you recommend people ordering a loan check. I know that only takes a few business days, so it's very reasonable to kind of start with that. And then the next step, would the next step always be transaction screen, or would you move to a phase 1 ever?
That's a difficult question to answer. So that's one of those, it depends sort of situation. So if you go into a situation, the high risk operation where they're more likely than not, just based common knowledge that there could be concerns, anything that had a dry cleaner, potentially a laundromat that could have had dry cleaning, anything industrial, risky commercial, or a gas station, you may want to go directly to a phase 1. But that's a good conversation to have. Most sites directly to a transaction screen would be appropriate, and that would allow more in-depth historical research that would include additional interviews, some additional regulatory information that we would compile that would further dig into the history a little bit to determine if any environmental risk remains.
So a lot of this is learning on my end as well, even though we've ordered our fair share of transaction screens. What actually is a transaction screen? Like, what does that mean? Does somebody go out to the property? Is it additional public records? Like, what actually is that report?
So let's back up to the loan check. The loan check includes a questionnaire that we would complete with the site contact. If they're willing to discuss the property a little bit, to be our eyes, we can ask them just basic questions, nothing in depth. We would look at 2 historical sources that we would purchase, some regulatory information that we would compile and review, and some limited municipal. You go to a transaction screen, that's more in-depth. All that information is more in-depth, but it also includes a site inspection by an environmental professional, whether that be an LCS inspector or similar to Noelle's a situation where she described a network of subcontractors. We also have a network of subcontractors that we have fully vetted based on their experience, criteria, et cetera, to make sure that they understand what we need of them. And they fill in the gaps in our footprint where we can't reach out west.
Got it.
Mainly southeast in certain parts. But that would include an inspection by an environmental professional.
What do they look for? Do you have any idea what they look for in an inspection? Just like, is there, big red flag items that they're looking out for?
Yeah, there certainly is. All the inspectors have been trained. I myself started as inspector, and I should have told you that at the beginning. I started with LCS 21 years ago, and had a couple years in the industry prior to that in the field. So I started as a field inspector. There is a good amount of training that goes along with it, and there's things that the environmental professional will see that will not necessarily mean anything to others. So we can find indicators of former fuel oil tanks, indicators of former dry cleaning machines, in-ground lifts, things like that might not be apparent to anyone else. That could be a feature of concern that could be associated with environmental risk. Got
it. So let's say, a potential big risk does come up, right? There's I don't know, whatever that is, red flags, something that's a big risk, and they got to take it to the next level. Mm-hmm. What is that next level? Is that a phase one, or does it go right to a phase two? And like, what happens then?
In most cases, ideally, you can go right to a phase two. And the reason for that is because the environmental professional has been on site. We know what the issues are. So we've essentially taken the first step in dictating the scope. We know what we need to investigate. The benefit to going to a phase one would be more on the regulatory side, compiling files and things like that at a state or government level. But we can also do that in a transaction screen. We would just have to craft it to suit. And that's essentially a better step. But if we were to go directly to a phase two to investigate any of the areas that were identified of potential concern, we've already taken the first step by doing the inspection. So we can write the proposal and give you an idea of what the cost, or just give you a ballpark idea of what the cost could be just based on what we already know about the site.
Do you guys do phase two, coordinate those, or no?
We do.
You do. Okay. Yeah. Cause I know that, like, as soon as you get in the phase two world, it's potentially it's very unique. It's a lot more expensive.
Yeah.
The timing can be a lot more. And I think just like any type of due diligence, it's, hey, you want to know kind of your risks ahead of time, potential risks at a time. And then you can make a business decision. And here's the thing on a lot of these services that I've learned is, like, the lenders initiating them, especially the environmental stuff, but the owner is the one who's taking the most risk on these things. So I always kind of have to question if an owner, is sophisticated enough to understand that, like, you should be wanting us to do some of this stuff, or you should be doing this yourself, because there could be some major risks that could be, the cost to remediate could be significantly more than the even value of the property.
You bring up a really, really good point that a lot of people overlook. They want the deal. They want the property. But in most states, if not all states, you buy it, you own it, irregardless of how it got there. So it's yours to address once you purchase. Yeah.
Anything else related to environmental services that you think is beneficial for people to know? I don't really have any additional questions on that.
Well, Liz did mention that LCS, we're 25 years. We have a lot of experience at the senior level. We have done so much work in the industry that in most cases, when an environmental issue arises, through some conversation, some good questioning, we can help get our arms around what the cost would be. So we can generally give a ballpark idea of what the risk involved is, or what it potentially would cost to address the issue should the lender decide to move forward. So that will help in structuring the deal appropriately.
Got it. All right, Julie. Well, I certainly appreciate it. I'm going to bring Mike on. Hey, Mike, how are you?
Good, Jason. How are you?
Doing great. Saving construction, the best topic for last.
That's for last, Jason. That's
so, full transparency, I haven't used any construction services from LCS yet, because we do most of that in our local market in-house. But let's say, I don't know, you have a real estate investor that, because I'm just not sure what product fits this, so maybe you can help with that. But let's say you have a lender and they're lending on a property in whatever, in the state of New York, they're in the state of Maryland, and they want somebody, an inspector, to go out to potentially verify that the draw schedule, construction scope of work is, reasonable for the amount of work that needs to get done, as well as doing, monitoring the project, or doing, let's call it like draw schedules, multiple times to make sure the work's actually getting accomplished before they release additional funds. Like what product would that fit under?
So I'd like to take one little step back. I think
Sure.
actually it's a two-pronged product and two-pronged approach. Prior to closing and in the deal making phase, we have what's called a plan and spec cost review. Basically, that plan and spec cost review will take a look at, it's about 12 different aspects of a project. Everything from the viability and accuracy of the plans to the budget, making sure that everything on the plans is in the budget, municipal approvals, building permits, schedules, general contractors contracts, architects contracts. Basically, it's a full workup or a full health of a project prior to closing. What we do in that report is we provide you a risk summary based off of what we see in the documents provided. And again, it can be tailored to, if you're doing a $500,000, remodel in Maryland, you probably don't need the full enchilada, right? So
Yeah.
We can do a stripped down version that has just plans and a budget. But if you're doing a $30 million new build in Manhattan, well, then guess what? You're going to want the full, going to want the full suite looked at. So that plan and spec cost review is great because the earlier you do it, the faster you can get a good no-go feel. And if you're feeling uneasy about something, it gets another set of eyes on it, basically says, hey, listen, this is a problem I find in this report or in this contract or in this set of plans. This should be addressed before you close, because it's always easier to get those things addressed before you close, right? Then after you close, we do what I would say is a pretty industry standard draw inspection. So basically, if we haven't done a plan and spec cost review, we'll request the plans and then the budget and any specifications on the project, along with the schedule and some of the other items like a municipal approval. And then we'll go through and we'll verify that the work that's been completed on site or being billed for has actually been completed. So if there's a line item of $500,000 for concrete work, we'll go there and make sure $500,000 was done if that's what they're billing for. So basically, we're there as your eyes and ears to make sure that you're not funding ahead of the work in place, so you don't get yourself into a bad situation.
Let's say it's a smaller like rehab project for a real estate investor, and whatever, they buy it for $300,000, needs $50,000 in renovations. Let's say they need a new roof, they need some HVAC, drywall, kitchen, stuff like that. And it seems like you guys are pretty reasonable on being creative to figure out kind of what works for people's budgets, timelines, and things like that. Does that kind of fall under any of those scopes, would you say?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. During those draw inspections, we'll actually look at the timelines. We'll look at every month. We'll make sure that the remaining funds to complete is enough to complete the project. So yeah, we'll do that analysis on a month-to-month basis. I will always say that it's better for the lender and the borrower. If those are done on a periodic basis. If you ask us to come take a look at a project in month 1, and then you don't ask to see us till month 6, a lot of work's been complete. And we can't give you a good gauge as to the quality, the speed, those type of things. We can only tell you what we've seen, and at that point, some things might be buried or missing.
And I think I heard you mention earlier that part of that includes making sure the permits were pulled and closed. Is that right? Is that kind of?
Yeah, correct. So we'll make sure permits are pulled. We'll make sure that they're posted on site. We'll let you know if they're not. We'll request them if they're not. At the end of the project, usually on the last draw, we'll do what we call kind of like a financial closeout. We'll make sure a certificate of occupancy has been issued. We'll make sure that the punch list has been complete and signed off by the architect. We'll make sure the architect has signed the AIA certificate of substantial completion. Basically, we'll make sure the job's done. And we like to do that right before you guys or any of the lenders will release retention. Because I think once the retention's out the door, the ability to leverage to get that work done is gone.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, anything else that you think's beneficial for these folks to hear? I think.
Yeah, I just think one of the big things is we do, so say a building's being acquired and you want to get, the real nuts and bolts of what condition is this building in. We do a suite of property condition reports. You hear like a good, better, best type version. We have a PIR, which is a standard property inspection report, which we'll go to the site. We'll look at about 12 different areas of the building. And let you know, are the windows in good shape? Will they last the term of the loan? Those type of things. And, the better, we'll do that same thing on a 5-year reserve with some costing. And then the best, which is the ASTM 2018-15 property condition report, that'll look at basically every piece of the building and let you know, okay, listen, this piece of collateral is going to need a roof replacement in 5 years. If you're doing a 12-year loan, you're going to want to make sure there's some equity being held back for that, or, so on any type of property acquisition, we always state, depending on the age of the acquisition or the age of the building that's being acquired, that gets done.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's not something I've thought of just because most of the stuff we do is a little bit shorter term stuff, but I know a lot of private lenders do longer term stuff. So that's good to know. Cool. Well, Mike, that's great. Certainly appreciate it. I'm just going to bring everybody else on screen real quick and thank everybody for coming. I think that was great. Hopefully everybody listening or viewing, got a good wealth of knowledge of what lender consulting services could potentially do to help their business between the appraisal side, the environmental side, and the construction side. Liz, do you just want to end with just telling everybody how they can get a hold of LCS?
Yeah, sure. Thanks again for having us, Jason. They can reach out to me directly, Liz Mahoney. I'm the Director of Sales and Business Development here, and they can reach out through email, lmahoney@lenderconsulting.com, or my phone, 980-579-1041.
Excellent. Thanks again.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast. Please note that the opinions stated by all the speakers on this show are only opinions and not legal, financial, or accounting advice. Please make sure to always check with your own legal, accounting, and financial professionals. If you'd enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast, we'd appreciate it if you spread the word. Make sure to check out hardmoneymastermind.com, the #1 free community for new and experienced private and hard money lenders.